A Giant Dog Bite album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning here tonight to chat about this latest album from Austin-based punk rock group A Giant Dog, who ever since their early days with albums like Fight have absolutely stolen my heart. This album completely threw me off my entire game at the time, because I mean I certainly loved a lot of modern punk, but that debut album to me just scratched so many itches. Not only did it have the sweaty, energetic, spit-in-your-face attitude that I need from modern punk, but it also had this sort of blackened rock and roll thing going on. I loved the hell out of this thing. I thought the production was super grimy, the hooks were super catchy, and overnight Sabrina Ellis just became one of my favorite figures in punk. Now, the next year, they very quickly followed it up with their Bone album, which I thought was more of a transition album for the band. The production was a lot more gussied up, and sure, there were great tracks on here, a lot of catchy hooks, but I felt like the band was still finding their footing as far as, you know, a shinier album, a more gussied up album goes. But they would finally, you know, get it with their next album. 2016's Pile took the gnarly, wild, sweaty energy of their debut, but, you know, incorporated some better production. The songwriting was better on this thing. The hooks were super catchy. I freaking adored this thing. Now, in 2017, the last time we heard from them in a actual, like, new music sense, they released their Toy album, and I thought it was pretty good, albeit a very different album. This was a much more indie-leaning album, a little bit more, you know, once again, still very gussied up sound, very clean at the end of the day, but it still had the gnarly energy of their early stuff, and they could still write a hook, and they were incorporating some elements of glam rock as well. A few short years later, though, I did get a very nice present from the band, as they also re-recorded and covered the entirety of my favorite Arcade Fire album, Neon Bible. Now, this album I've been waiting for this album a long time, and I've been really hyped just for a new Giant Dog project. I know I've loved the singles. I love the thought that this is a concept album about gender dysmorphia. Let's dive into this thing. This album starts off with Welcome to Avalonia, and right off the bat, it's a pretty stunning start that ushers in a new sound for the band. This is far from where we saw them last. We get some cosmic synths, very glitzy production. Most importantly, the band take their time with this intro. This is not a, you know, hit it and quit it punk tune that it just, you know, arrives, bites you in the ass, and then leaves. This is a very, you know, pensive track. This is a very different album. And before this track really takes off, you get these really intense pounding drums and an excessive use of violins that's actually pretty tasteful. I don't know what's going on, but I do like it a lot. And while this is far from where I'm comfortable hearing the band, it's a pretty thrilling start. The crunchy riff, the trademark dual vocals that we get, it's a pretty stunning start. I believe is the real deal, though. This is a great single. I've loved it since it dropped. It's one of the crunchier and gnarlier tracks here. It's got some bite to it, but it also has that big, glamorous hook that really keeps you invested. And lyrically, they do bring their A-game here. Yes, there are some pretty far-out lyrics on this album from time to time, very cosmic lyrics, very strange, but they bring their A-game and they make it work. Long-time A Giant Dog fans in Destiny, you're going to want to check this out. This track is so good. It's intense, it's energetic, it's upbeat. Love the use of the violins again. It's one of the most throttling tracks that we get here, and I love how tortured it comes off. It's probably the shortest track here, but it's also easily one of the most compelling. But this is a big leap for A Giant Dog, and clearly there are some growing pains. Like Happiness Awaits Inside, for example. This is a much more organic sounding track, especially as far as the instrumental goes, which I'm not pissed off about. Lyrically, it's fascinating as well. My only issue is A Giant Dog just do not sound comfortable with this track. They just sound awkward and clunky on here. Watch Me Sleeping, I think it's my least favorite track here by far. This to me is a little bit too much of a stretch. I will always commend artists for taking risks. As a matter of fact, you know, so many of my favorite albums of this year are about artists taking risks. But this, to me, is a little bit too much of a stretch. This is more or less an experimental music piece with some, you know, A Giant Dog-isms thrown in. I mean, lyrically, it's still the same blast of sexuality that the rest of this album has been. But the rest of this track, at least to me, A Giant Dog really don't go the distance. They have the ideas, but it doesn't really get there, even if the last 30 seconds or so is really thrilling. And In Rainbows on paper sounds great. It's got a lot of drama, mostly because of this upbeat riff, Sabrina's performance, which is fantastic, and the intense violins once again. But when you really break it down, I feel like this track is more middle of the road than anything. While euphoric and very big sounding, I feel like this track is kind of a hodgepodge of a giant dog, trying to please everyone, trying to be indie darlings, but also incorporating elements of their earlier music, which is exciting at parts, but when you break it down, it's a little much. I certainly respect it, but it's not for me. But for a very different album from the Austin band, I think this is still decent. It's very decent. Still really love Different Than. This was one of the first singles that I heard from this album, and truthfully, it took some time to grow on me. I wasn't enamored with it at first. Lyrically, it's nothing short of a mission statement and one of the most deeply personal tracks here, though. The guitar riff is hypnotic, and Sabrina's performance on this track is one of the most just pure performances you're ever gonna hear from her. And the final minute is simply euphoric. Just know, going into tracks like this is far from the band that A Giant Dog was years ago. And I hope you like the violins that have been popping up throughout this album, because there's more of them on tracks like A Daydream. This is one of the most tense tracks on this album. It just sounds like a giant dog is ready to pounce at any moment. But it actually ends up being one of the more sweet on the ears and, dare I say, pop-oriented tracks on this album. The hook is nothing short of blissful, and the fact that this is over a 5-minute track, that's a big stretch for them, and they do it really well. And Watch It Burn has a little bit more of a bite to it, albeit a strange one. This is one of the most just angular and left field sounding tracks on this entire record. It's a sort of weird, noisy slow burner, but A Giant Dog really pulled it off, mostly due to just how dramatic this track is, how personal it is, how intense it is. Once again, this could be used as a real mission statement for this album, and I love the tasteful throwbacks to earlier. It's easily the most epic track here. This album's pretty darn good. It's not like the most exciting album from A Giant Dog. I still don't get that, wild feeling as I did from their early records. That's just me though, but I commend them for this. This is a very different album for them. This is a very personal album. This is a very dramatic album. They try a lot of new things, and most of it does pay off. While there are some growing pains, and sometimes I wish I would just rather listen to their earlier stuff, yeah, I commend what they're doing and what they're trying, and it does pull off for the most part. Feeling a decent 7 on this album, but let me know what you all think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.